Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name is George.
My name's Oscar. And in this week's episode, we talked about miracles, which is an incredible thing to talk about. I feel very enlivened, if that's a word, by this episode. I feel refreshed by it. And just talking about what we assume to be reality, what is it like to actually be alive? I think, a lot of it is around our assumptions of things. And it's really fun to kind of dive in and question those things. So very enjoyable episode to record.
I came in feeling in a particularly good mood, had a coffee, so I'm feeling pretty on it. I'm not very hardy with the caffeine, so it really hits me. But what you were saying as well before the episode, actually, about how these particular conversations that where you're talking about a topic that can really kind of make it arise within yourself. Just talking about something, talking about the miraculous has just got me feeling, rather miraculous myself. So, and that feeling can be yours if you listen to the end of the episode. So please enjoy. I felt like we got quite loose in this episode. I feel like we've kind of really found our stride recently in the last few episodes. I've been really enjoying them. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Well, let's get into the episode. So the quote for this week is from Albert Einstein, and it is, "There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle." And I'd actually first like to read out the definition of a miracle, because it's clearly a very important part of this quote. So the definition is, I just missed out a whole bunch of syllables there. Is an extraordinary and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws and is therefore attributed to a divine agency. So the first way that this quote is talking about of seeing nothing as a miracle is, the way that a lot of us live most of our lives. I live most of my life in that way. And I think really the reason why things can seem unmiraculous is that we don't have all these crazy things that aren't explainable by scientific laws. They just seem to be like, oh yeah, I know what the world is like. The cars drive down the street. I go to my job. There's these things, you've got concepts of like, geopolitical things going on and all these different things. And they all kind of basically make sense. They're pretty consistent. You're kind of moving in a linear fashion through time. Things, seem pretty reasonable, relatively predictable. You can't tell exactly what's going to happen, but usually the things that happen aren't that surprising in general. And I think that the reason why we can really get into that mindset is because of what we take for granted. We take for granted, the fact that we're alive and that all of this is happening. But if you actually go a step back, then you can realize that really everything is a miracle that it's even happened. So if you go, for example, back to the Big Bang, which was over 3 billion years ago, and I definitely did not know that until I researched it before the episode. But so like over 3 billion years ago, and somehow that Big Bang has turned into like human cities and giraffes and animals and Netflix, and even somehow you have arisen and have the ability to perceive this little instance that has been created by the Big Bang. Like it's so nuts. And that gap of like our concept of the Big Bang all the way up to here, we've got ways to kind of try and make it seem logical and make sense. But like, how does matter even exist? Like, how is there even stuff? Could there not be stuff? Like, there's just so much craziness that we have absolutely no idea about. And our lives are built on top of that. And it's natural that we just kind of take it for granted, really, because that's a much easier way to live. In order to like go to your job and be within a society, it's usually helpful to kind of, to not be just like staring at the sky like, oh my God, what the fuck is happening? How do I exist? Like, this is, this is not really like you're not programmed evolutionarily to be thinking like that all the time, because, the cavemen who spent all the time like just looking at the stars like, what the fuck? Those are the ones who just would have starved or whatever. It's not very useful, but it is something that's very enjoyable and very interesting to explore. Yeah, it's a very cool way that you can see the world and just flip that switch to see it from a different perspective and see everything as miraculous. So yeah, there we go. There's my first little bits that I thought of with it, and I'm curious to hear what you've been thinking.
I want to read a quote that links to this quote.
Okay,
as my first little bit. So this is by a guy called Thomas Merton. Life is this simple. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and the divine is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or a fable. It is true. So what that essentially is saying, if you can get over the word divine being used, is that there is, well, it's the same as this quote, that the real direct experience of just being conscious, of just being alive and being aware is miraculous, and it is actually a magical experience. It might not be that you're listening and you can relate to that, but there will be points in your life where that will have been recognized. So yeah, looking up into the sky at night, really getting a sense of how vast the world is, moments of awe. These are moments where the mind or thought dies down and concepts die down, and just this pure just the really direct sense of being alive and being conscious is there. Is sort of like, not to put down how important thoughts are to function, but thoughts and concepts add veils, and we've got multiple veils in front of our eyes, because there's sort of a mesh of constructs and ways of making sense of things, but behind those veils is just the raw experience of being alive. And we can talk about miraculous things, but I think if you're to have, say, ever tried psychedelics or got into a deep meditative state, been on a retreat, had those awe-inspiring moments that may be really few and far between, because we're, our build-up of concepts and constructs around the world is literally like that pervades our entire life. For that to be seen through or to disappear even for a second is very rare for most of us. So these might only be really short glimpses, but in those moments, it is, I'd say, miraculous or magic or divine is the perfect way of describing it. It's and I have often been in states like that and just referred to it as being like magic, because the definition for miracle that I had just myself was something inexplicable and beautiful. And that sense of being alive, that raw sense of just being alive, has that quality. It's kind of inexplicable, like, because we can explain things through science, we can dissect things, and we can try and figure out what kind of the cause and effect is, one thing leading to another, how things are constructed in a way, but it still doesn't really get to the base of the fact that anything happens at all. The fact that we are just alive, like, that is the fact that we're conscious is miraculous. It is inexplicable. It's so, you can't really get to the base of it in a way. So yeah, that's a real connection that I make, is just
Mm.
pure consciousness, just really recognizing when you're alive, and that sense of the miraculous, really.
Yeah. And I've heard scientists who study consciousness talk about it, and just saying that like they really have no idea what the fuck consciousness is or how it happens. Like there's some things that they understand, but like so much of it is completely unknown, and like where does it arise? Where does it happen? It's just so bizarre and so unknown. And yeah, I think those kind of religious type words can actually be, you know, I used to definitely shy away from using them, but I'm more comfortable using them now. And just as like, what the fuck else are you gonna use to describe this sort of stuff? You know, it feels, because it is like magic, and you can, you know, magic is, you know, even if you just think of like a magician, right? They do something that appears, you know, we call magic, but essentially, you know, they're doing something that's constrained within the laws of the universe, but they've managed to make it look like it's something that doesn't fit into the laws of our universe. That's the trick, really. But something that's magic is just something that we don't understand. Doesn't mean that there won't someday we'll understand consciousness and how that arises. And I think, you know, that's just the progress of science, that we get closer and closer to understanding what everything is and how things connect, and what making predictions about how things will happen in the future. But there is just so much unknown, and we're so far from understanding everything. And I don't know if that is something that's even possible to get to. There's so much just wonder and awesomeness of this just crazy shit that's happening. Like I've had quite a few moments, some since kind of, you know, understanding a bit more about spirituality, but some before that, of just being like, whoa, I'm alive. Like, what, how did this happen? Like, how am I alive? Like, I remember once I was walking back from the skate park, walking up the hill, and just being like, wow, what the how did this happen? How am I now like here walking up this road? Like, what, like it's just completely miraculous. Like there's no other way to describe it. And I remember when I've been in that headspace, it's really strange to think of other people not being in that headspace or not thinking about that, because you can just get so caught up in the story and so tightly woven into your life. You know, I think that time walking from the skate park was the first time I'd had that. And this was like, I don't know, when I was maybe like 15 or 16 or something. And I think that I've gone 16 years without stepping outside of the story of the world and everything. Like it's unbelievable how rare those experiences can be. Obviously, once you've had one, it's something that you can like dip into more easily. But there's a lot of people who go, you know, their entire life without really having those like miraculous moments.
Yeah. And I guess what someone might say is that that's just another experience, you know, that it's just like, oh, you just felt a bit kind of like spaced out or whatever. But I think it's likely that all the listeners for this show, being the nature of this show, has had at least one experience in memory of that, even if they were very young or whatever. I think it's safe to say that if you're having an experience like that, then you know that it is very profound. You know, it's you just intuitively know this is a lot more real than my usual state of being. My usual state of being is way more like deluded and confused as a way of being than this, which is very quiet and very vivid and very three-dimensional, and like, wow, this is okay. This is real life. This is me really experiencing what life is right now, and that is just intuitive. So, you know, again, I couldn't really get into a debate with someone about that, because other than just saying you know it when you see it. It's difficult to kind of go any further than that, but it just really intuitively feels true that is significant. Yeah, that you're getting a real taste of life in those moments. And I love talking about this stuff because I find that it's so kind of conducive to really being more reflective and kind of getting into states like that. But it's also interesting what you said about the fact that, you know, once you've had an experience like that, then in a way it becomes more available. And I agree with that, because if I sit down and I have an intention to become more present and to sink into a space like that, then I will be able to do that given a certain amount of time. However, it's incredible how enticing the story of the world is. Like it's kind of unbelievable, being that I've had that kind of profound insight of the significance of coming back to a sense of presence and that sense of mystery so many times. And yet I always, like, the addiction to being in this kind of constructed world is so strong, you know, it's so enticing that I choose to be in that place much more than I choose to come back to this sense of magic and mystery and you know, something more miraculous. And that's just very funny, and that's definitely funny to the person in the miraculous state. You know, I know, like, again, being in a place like that and being like, what the fuck am I doing most of the time? I just, like, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to get like little kind of something, like bits of pleasure, like scraping around for like these little bits of pleasure on Instagram or whatever, like, you know, and like I'm just kind of like trying to get these little tiny nibbles of some little bit of pleasure here and there. And this is available the whole time,
24/7.
This is available.
And
it's just like, it's fucking laughable. It's not like there's a judgment. It's just hilarious that like how what you exchange, you know, like what do you actually pick when living from this miraculous place is actually possible so much of the time, you know?
Well, I've heard it described in a neuroscience context, how, you know, obviously we like strengthen these connections when we have thoughts or we have common patterns of behavior, and, you know, the more we do those, the more we strengthen them. And I've heard the analogy of, like, imagine you've got a snowy hill and you're sledging down it. And as you keep sledging down it, you're going to end up, it will just develop these paths of where the sledge goes. And if you keep going down, you're going to end up deepening these grooves, and you get more into that little way of going. And it can be hard to get out of those sometimes, you know, like you can be like really make an effort to like go from a different part of the hill that you haven't been on, or like try and make a new path, but then you're very quickly gonna kind of get back into one of the old ones and then go down that way. Like it can be quite tricky. One way actually that was described when I heard that analogy was about using mushrooms, and how that can actually be a reset for some people, or at least essentially the analogy was that it can kind of like give you a fresh snow, so you can like remake those paths from scratch. Now, obviously it's not as simple as like a complete hard reset, and I'm not just like saying everyone should just like do mushrooms and reprogram their mind or something. But there are ways that you can kind of like reset yourself, and sometimes that can be through, you know, like a psychedelic or something, or just a very powerful experience or something that really changes how you see the world. And then that can end up, you know, shifting, giving you a fresh snow, or kind of helping you to develop a new path. But yeah, very easy to get stuck in those grooves, really.
I thought we could have a little play with, I suppose we've kind of delved right into just the magic of consciousness itself and just being aware and being alive. But I thought it would be cool to go into not just the experience of life being miraculous, but just, well, maybe experiences that we've had of what we might call as being miraculous, I guess. Stuff that is sort of inexplicable or like quite amazing happening. I had something happen yesterday actually, which was pretty miraculous. So I sent in a proposal to do a painting, and I've been doing these paintings at the moment which are based on song lyrics. And I got approached about doing this commission for someone. So I went away and I had a little look through my Spotify and, picked a couple of songs to work with and created a design and sent off this design. And yesterday I got an email back saying basically, like, I don't want to sound weird, but the song that you picked, well, my husband died a couple of years ago of cancer, and this was our song that you picked. And it's a really obscure song. It's not like a it's not like a Jimi Hendrix song or whatever. Like it's quite an obscure song. And she was saying that ever since he's died, like, this song has just been coming on in like cafes, and anytime her family like meets up, this song just seems to start playing somewhere.
Wow.
And I just sent over this lyric to her. So she was obviously like really happy, and like it was such a like beautiful thing to happen, that would happen. But it was just like one of those moments where it's like, because you can take two angles on it. It's like, one is that coincidences happen and odds are that you're going to pick a significant song for someone at some point, fine. That's kind of that's one way of looking at it. The other way, which I'm choosing to look at it, is that there's something more going on, and I don't know what it is, but that was a very serendipitous, magical moment that was significant for me and this person. And I like to choose to believe that there's a bit more at play, there as to why that ended up happening. And I find that taking that angle, there's a lot more delight in there and significance. It's a choice. I'm choosing to see the world in that light.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, of seeing things as more magical, actually. And I've got a couple of friends who are both very into it. And my friend Andy as well is very into this idea of serendipity. And I remember it was interesting just hanging out with him, because he would just like find these things all the time and just was focusing on them and reinforcing them. And it just kind of makes your life feel a little bit more magical. It's kind of harmless, really. You just keep finding these little moments. You're like, oh, wow, God, this is strange. Like, I was just looking for that. And then boom, there's one right there. Like these things do actually happen a lot. And, the whole point is you don't need to try and understand it or explain it away. You can just enjoy it. Like, don't just think like, wow, this is a really beautiful, amazing thing that this song I happen to pick. You can believe that maybe you have some connection with this person, or there's something magical going on, and that's fine. Like and I used to be a lot more kind of dismissive of that sort of thing, but I think that like can really make life more enjoyable and more meaningful. And I don't think it's like a harmful thing to do. My friend Andy, actually, I think I told you this story when I came to visit you in Manchester, but he was doing a thing. I think it's called dowsing, but I'm not 100% on that. But essentially, he was doing it like his version of it. But essentially, it was like he was going to this market and he wanted to find something magical, something that was like a good luck charm, essentially. And he just had this in his mind. He's like, right, I'm gonna go to this market and I'm gonna find a really something very lucky that I'm gonna buy and keep with me. And I can't remember actually what it was he found, but he found something that day after setting that intention, and he's kind of bestowed it with meaning and keeps it with him. And I think that's just such a fun thing to do. It's like a playful thing. It's a more playful relationship with life, and that's something that I've really wanted to embrace more, because it can just be so much fun. And I prefer living in that world than a very kind of secular, atheistic, logical world. Doesn't mean that it's such a weird area to get into, because like I'm already like me listening to this like a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, it's like red flags, this guy's a fucking idiot. It's like, oh yeah, you don't like logic, bro, like what the fuck. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I prefer things that can't be proven and just to believe them, and that's fun. Like,
yeah.
but I think if you're generally someone who's thoughtful, you can play with these different ideas and do it in a fun way that does enhance your life. You can have these things which make you feel lucky or are meaningful or have these extra moments of connection with people, and that's fine to bestow them with extra meaning, and it can make life seem more miraculous. That's just another, like in this quote, it says that there's only 2 ways to live your life, and that's one of them. You can choose to make things more special and more magical, and to really see those things and look for them, and that can be a much more enjoyable way to live sometimes.
Also, there is an assumption, I guess, in the first way of seeing the world as if it just isn't miraculous at all. There's an assumption within that the conclusions that have been made and the models that you use are fixed and they're not going to change, and that they are factual, they are true. And the fact is, scientific theory, ideas about things are being disproven all the time. Studies turn out to be basically incorrect or not done in the correct way, or very outdated, or they cancel each other out somehow. And in moments like that, I guess collectively, where we've got an assumption about how things are, and it really just seems like that is the truth. For example, you might have the assumption that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? Like, I believe that to be true just because I was told it so much when I was growing up. And yet now loads of people are doing intermittent fasting, and a lot of people don't eat breakfast. And I'm sure there's many theories that disprove that particular one, but that's part of my model for the world. And so my brain somewhere in the back would say that that's true and a fact. Yet every single one of us has these different models as to how the world is. So it's not like there is this base level foundation of knowledge that is unchangeable and true, and we happen to either live in that world of unchangeable, completely true knowledge about things, or the miraculous world. The choice really is, do we live completely conceptually and completely thought based, as in every single thing that we look at and do is propped up by this pyramid of ideas that seems solid and fixed, but actually isn't? Or do we live in a way that we are not constantly dependent and reliant on these models, or we can recognize, in fact, it's more like we can recognize the usefulness of these pyramid of ideas for everything, but also see that they are not fixed and they are not absolutely true. Even the most seemingly certain things, there's doubts about them, and they will change. And a Victorian idea of how the world works is completely different from a modern person's idea of how the world works. So the choice is between those two things.
And I think you're right. Like, it's a mistake as well to be so attached to that and really try and take comfort in it, as like you said, as it being some solid foundation of like, you can think like, we've got most stuff figured out. There might be a few bits that we're not sure about, but we're working on that. And, that can give you a lot of comfort. But, a lot of people would have felt the same degree of certainty about what was known, like in the Victorian age, with, the level of like science and their medicine and everything they had there. They may have felt the same degree of certainty from that understanding there. And I think there's another thing actually from my same friend that is one of his kind of I guess his mantra, something that he talks about a lot, is that anything can happen. And I think that's a really nice thing to have, because it's an openness and a receptivity that like anything can happen. You're not creating this rigid world where these are the sort of things that can happen. Like you really have an openness of like, I know anything can happen. Like who knows what the next moment will bring. It could be something completely different, like completely different to your experience now. It could be like, you know, you transform into a different being or something. You know, I think that's unlikely, but you never know. You literally just don't know. And that's something I really like, and how I've changed how I think about the world. Like I really think less about the world and how to live a good life, how to do the things you need to do in the world, how to like be successful, quote unquote. But I now when I say things, I say understanding how to navigate reality, because that doesn't take for granted the, you know, the earth and living in England and all these other things. It just leaves an openness, because it could be that the consciousness that I am now, it ends up experiencing very different things that aren't like life as I know it. And I just love that way of thinking of it, of just navigating through reality, of trying to, you know, have a confidence and an openness to just experience what's going to happen and to see what can happen, and just be open-minded to things that you don't expect happening, to essentially miraculous things happening. And when you've got an openness to miracles, then you're going to experience more of them.
That feels like a great place to move on to next week's quote.
Nice. The best bit. So yeah, what have you got for us?
So it links in quite nicely, actually. So this is a quote by spiritual teacher Jack Kornfield.
Oh, nice. I got a couple on my list of him that I want to do at some point. Yeah.
Without attention to our hearts, we become like the generation of parents who followed popular experts in refusing to feed or pick up crying children. Even though every wise instinct and cellular impulse in their body called for them to hold and comfort their child in pain.
Nice.
Doesn't roll off the tongue, that one. But the reason why I say it links in is just that we were talking about, what we assume to be the reality of things.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
you know, and in this case, feeding or not feeding and not picking up your crying child.
Mm-hmm.
That was like, yep, that logically makes sense. I can add that up. You don't want to condition a child to be weak and to just cry to get what they want. You know, that's not what we do. And yet that fact, you know, led to essentially traumatizing probably multiple generations of people because of that idea of reality. So it's an interesting example of exactly that.
I'm happy to say that's not one of the ones I had written down. I was like, I better not do one of the ones I got listed. I was saving them for a rainy day.
You can. Yeah, I don't think this one is sitting online somewhere to be picked up. Cool. I had to flip open a book and find this one.
All right, mate. Yeah. Nice dig at me with my cool quotes search history. cooldeepquotes.com.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, if you think that anyone else would enjoy it, it would be lovely if you could share it with them. We are growing organically, as you know, and it just means such a huge amount to get new listeners and also to hear from you. If you found anything particularly interesting about this episode, you want to chat with us about it, head to knowwhatimean.podcast, which is our Instagram, or you can drop us an email, which is in the description below this episode. Much love and see you next week.
Peace.